Recently, Q and I sat down to have a very important conversation. Conversation was called Courageous Conversations. And we had this conversation in a room full of black men ahead of the election. Now, we've discussed on this show that, black men were in the news for a number of reasons, because of their support of Donald Trump or their lack of support for Kamala Harris or whatever. And we finally were able to sit down and have it out with a room full of black men from all different political backgrounds. And we got some perspective on how some people felt. We got some information in terms of where some black men get their information from, and whether or not it's vetted, if it comes from far right sources or online sources or whatever. And then we got some, just some opinions. And, some of the opinions were very similar to ours, and some of the opinions were very different from ours. And all of this was okay, because we needed a starting point so that we could continue to grow as individual men, but we also could grow our cohesion as a group of individuals who have more or less similar experiences in this country. So we look at that event like it was a positive experience. Indeed, we want to do more of them. And one of the things that we didn't get to do was answer all of the questions that were submitted for us to answer as best we could. And so we were given a handful of questions after the fact, and we thought that we would make this episode addressing some of those questions. Some of them we kind of touched on while we were there, so we'll be sure to include some of that here, and hopefully bring you into the conversation that we were able to have on the ground during Courageous Conversations. So I'm Ramses Ja.
And I am Q Ward, and glad that we're getting a chance to have this conversation, because the last thing we wanted to do when organizing Courageous Conversations was to have a bunch of people leave feeling unheard, when the entire reason that we cultivated that space was that so people in a very non-hostile way could have their voices heard. So I'm glad we're getting a chance to sit down and do this.
Yeah. Our first question, we're not going to say the names of the people who submitted the questions, just because the nature of the Courageous Conversations event was very private. There was no media coverage. It was just us and some black men and getting some perspective. But the first question asks us, are we voting based on skin tone or actual tangibles that can be produced? And we hold the politicians accountable. And what's our plan to hold them accountable? It's a great question.
I think it's a fantastic question. And I want to, because we're not sitting face to face with the person, I want to try to translate what I think they mean. Mm-hmm. And then all we can do is give insight, how we view this, and answer according to how we feel. So it's not the gospel according to Civic Cipher. It's just our position on the question. Are we voting based on skin tone? I think is a fair question to ask. I think an important thing to point out is that for the history of the United States, black people have had to deal with being under the thumb or under the boot of the oppressor. We've been manipulated. We've been taken advantage of. We've been taken for granted. We've been made to feel we don't matter. We've been forgotten about. The list goes on and on. And one thing we don't like is being put in a position where we feel like we're being pandered to, where we're being used. People are kind of using blackness as a token that they can just cash in, and in a lot of cases simply by being black. So I understand why that challenge is presented. The thing that often troubles me in cases like this one, or in this case specifically, is that our vote in this particular election, this is not a vacuum. It's not just, are we voting for this candidate? It is, as we've echoed on the show multiple times, a zero-sum binary decision at this point. There are two candidates and one of them will be president. Whether we participate or not, whether we disqualify one candidate because they're black or not. And there is one person in this race who has been president before. As much as people try to make it seem as if Vice President Harris is the president now, she's not. Former President Trump, however, we got 4 years of that. And I've heard people say they don't know enough about Vice President Harris's policies. We'll get to that shortly. But we know a lot about former President Trump's policies. I know a lot of people saying we don't know enough about Vice President Harris as a candidate or as a person, but we know a lot about former President Trump. So is this a vote for her simply because of her skin tone, or I'm guessing because she's black? No, but I'm black. And I know what this experience in this country will be like for me if the other candidate becomes president. And that colors, forgive my use of that term, but that colors the way I see the decision-making process in this election. As far as accountability, the way that we most actively hold our elected officials accountable, in this case, is by first exercising our vote. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, right? If I've already voted for them, they already got what they wanted. Well, again, we have to talk about the two candidates that are present. With one of these candidates, Ramses and I can turn on our microphones and disagree with her all the time. We can point out her flaws and her mistakes. We can even incorrectly point out her flaws and mistakes and then learn more and then come back and have to apologize to her.
Yeah, we've done that.
We can continue to exercise our right. The next time the calendar says it should be time to vote again, we get to vote again. We can start organizing and having conversations as a collective community now so that we can flex not just our vote, but our money and our voices collectively as a community to hold our elected officials accountable. We will not wait until the next time the election is now right in front of us to start talking about accountability. Right? A lot of things that we wait until election time to discuss and to try to exercise, we don't realize that at that point it's too late. Right? So I know it seems backwards, that you would take the test and then learn the lesson, but in this case, that's how it works. You vote so that you can vote again. You vote so that you can disagree. You vote so that you can organize and attempt to hold accountable. One of these candidates plans to make all of the above illegal. He has already started to refer to me, because maybe you agree with him, but he's already started to refer to me and those of us that don't agree with him as the enemy from within, who he can weaponize police and military against. He's already pointed out people who are political enemies of his, who he plans to seek out revenge on. He's already talked about, or not even just talked about, but helped push and encourage allies of his to get rid of reproductive freedoms for our mothers, our sisters, our daughters, our wives. He's already shown us that he wants to be a dictator. His words, not mine. He's already said to his followers, to his people, to his congregation, that you'll no longer have to vote because we're going to fix it. So he said a lot about the type of man and the type of president that he wants to be. We know about how he views women in general, the things he thinks he's allowed to do to them just because. We've heard him say that he's going to do things that are not popular with women and that he does not care about that either. So we know a lot about who we're voting for and what we're up against. And I think those are things that we should consider from both parties before we decide to just simply disqualify one candidate while holding her to levels of scrutiny that the other couldn't stand up to for 5 minutes. We've now drug her through for months. I hate to take up all of the oxygen on this question, but it's a talking point that we've seen before where people are deciding we're not going to vote for her just because she's black, and that's fair. But when you see what she's up against, this should not, for those of us, who share that skin tone, be a hard decision, because it's not because she's black. It's if we're talking about policies, and again, there's more questions about that, so I don't want to speak too much on the policy part because there's more coming up. But look at the other candidate, find me a single redeeming quality, and I would love to continue this conversation with regard to skin tone.
I think that was well stated. Next question. Let me find this one. Okay. Policies. You had the foresight. What are the policies and issues of either candidate that actually serves us and is in our best interest? Is our best interest individualized or as a collective? Okay, I'll try to take this one. First off, for a person that sincerely wants to know what it is that these individual candidates' policies are, that is something that you don't need us to articulate for you. That is something that's very Googleable. You can find that out on your own. But we have had a chance to become familiar with Project 2025. And even though Donald Trump has attempted to distance himself from Project 2025, which we know better.
Some of us do.
Some of us know better.
Yeah.
But he also has, it's called Agenda 47. So if you are the sort of person that still believes Donald Trump, you can look at what he has up as Agenda 47. And a lot of it is stuff that you would find in Project 2025 as well. Kamala Harris has, it's referred to as an opportunity economy. This is basically her strategy.
That's just one of her strategies, by the way.
Right.
You go to KamalaHarris.com. She has a chapter by chapter breakdown of every policy that she plans to put into legislation and law.
Exactly.
So like Ram just said, if you really want that information, you can very easily go search it out.
Yeah, they made it very simple. And in terms of the policies of Kamala Harris, how she wants to ensure that black men have money to start businesses. She understands the inequalities that black people face in so far as housing is concerned. One of the things that, she takes a bow for is the cost cap on insulin, which is something that has disproportionately affected, black households over the years. And then, the other forward-thinking, more progressive things that she has identified that will benefit black men. Not exclusively, of course, it doesn't work that way, but these are areas where it will make more of an impact for black Americans than maybe some historical legislation has.
It's kind of like she reverse engineered it. She looked at the areas that impact us most and then developed policy to speak to
those areas. Yeah. And then they ultimately translate into more prosperity in black and brown communities. But it's not exclusive. This is America, the United States of America. So anyway, the short of it is that all of those are there and they're well documented, and you're welcome to check all of those things out. Another thing I want to add right here is that historically, black people have voted for more progressive, more liberal policies and candidates because they have tended to serve us well. You can look at the civil rights movement, you could look at affirmative action, you could look at the SNAP program and assistance, for families that are enduring, poverty. You can look at anti-discriminatory legislation that's been passed historically. That stuff has historically come from the more progressive facet of this country. I'm saying Democrats. And so when you look at it long term and you look at what has been done for Black people historically, granted, it might not be everything, it might not be everything that you want in this moment. Progress is slow on the scale of a country. But for folks that feel like we're just throwing our vote away every time, I feel like we have a lot of evidence to the contrary. We can look back and see the progress. And if you feel like you're throwing your vote away for your own self or for your own lifetime, then you're ignoring the fact that you might have kids or grandkids or nephews and nieces or grandnephews and nieces that will have to inherit this world. And your vote could shape their lives, because indeed people that lived before me, their votes shape the life that I'm living right now. And so, yes, progress can be very slow. But, for folks that feel like, we're throwing our votes away because we're voting for Democrats again, I challenge that. I challenge that narrative, and I'm not telling you to vote any certain type of way in this moment. Other moments I would. What I rather would say in this moment is that to not vote is like, there's only one way to engage in a democracy, and for you to not engage, that's not how democracy works. No one looks at the person that didn't vote and says, oh my gosh, we should be doing more to get his vote or her vote. Rather, they look at the people who voted and how they voted, and then they shape policy according to that. So, and for anyone that says, that they don't want to vote, or, voting a certain way is throwing your vote away, I would push back against that. Go ahead.
You just planted a seed in my head that I had not articulated prior. The reason why it has become so popular to be so conspicuously and vehemently racist is because a certain candidate noticed that's a good way to be elected. Mm-hmm. A lot of people voted to support that rhetoric, so he's tripled down on it. And you just said that right now, and it kind of sparked a thought like, wow, that's why there are candidates all over the country now marching to that same tune, because they saw people come out in numbers and vote that way. So they voted according to that, not contrary to it. Yeah. So that's a really brilliant point that you made. No one says to the people who aren't participating, let me do more for you. It's never worked that way. But you saying that right now just made that very clear in my head. Thanks.
I have something that I think is going to spark a thought in your head too, because the second part of this question is our best interest individualized or as a collective? And I think that I want you to take the last word on this one, but I think that it's all about your own personal philosophy. I say that if you're asking the question of Black people in general, if our best interest is individualized or collective, then the answer is in the question. It's collective. We're talking to Black people. We have collective interests that we need to address before we can deal with individual interests, right? But there are some people who really feel like you got the same 24 hours in your day as I got in mine. I get off my couch, I get out there, I hustle, and I get to it, and I got something to show for myself. Don't come knocking on my door with a handout when you ain't did the work that I did with the same 24 hours, right? There are people who feel that way. And I think that is a personality type. In fact, there's evidence to show that that's a personality type, right? And then there's people, and I've said this before on the show, and Q's going to be familiar with this story, but there's people like me who recognize that everybody works hard, not just that one person. Most everybody works hard. Everybody gets up off the couch and they go to work and whatever, and no matter what they do, they can't seem to get ahead or even get a fair shot. So it's not hard work. Some people feel like they studied harder in school. No, everybody is in school to learn, for the most part. there's people that think that everybody has the same access to the same material. Okay, cool, whatever. There's a lot of people that feel that. And then there's people like me who, I got the worst story that you could have. I came from the worst city at the worst time, in the worst circumstances, with both parents on dope, rats and roaches in the food of my house. People coming after my parents, people coming after, you know what I'm saying? People dying on the sidewalk in front of my house. People I knew dead, a human body, a human form laying twisted on the sidewalk in an unnatural shape. Saw it as a little kid. That's where I come from. And right now I speak onto this microphone to the whole United States of America. I worked hard, sure. I'm smart, sure. But I didn't work harder than other people. I'm not smarter than other people. I got lucky. That's it. So for me, I feel like if I look at things like it should be individual, like I worked hard and I got what I need, so that's on me, the rest of y'all figure it out, I'll be bogus if I thought about things like that. I'm not saying other people are bogus. I'm saying my personality isn't that way. I recognize that I'm lucky. I recognize that you might use the word blessed, whatever, and I do my best to share opportunities and share platforms and share time and space and energy and bandwidth so that other people can have access to it too. That's how I feel. I feel that way about black people. I'm black, so I feel that way about black people. I feel that way about gay people. I feel that way about marginalized people. I feel that way about women. I feel like anybody who's born with a little bit of a strike against you, sometimes that looks like white men too. You know what I'm saying? But I'm here to impart love and bring some equity and some balance to the universe. So, you decide what's right for you. But Q has a philosophy that I think sums it up a little bit better. You don't have to lean into that right now because I know we got more questions, but I did want you to get the last word because that part of the question reminded me of you. Yeah,
I don't know that I have a philosophy that leans into it better. I think the way that you articulated that was masterful, and wish more people thought the way that you did in a collective sense of, I don't have everything I have because I'm better than you. God, the universe, luck, some teacher, some mentor helped me. And who am I to not pay that forward to the next person who, they've done this masterful thing of pitting us against one another with that mindset, right? That the other person that doesn't have it's because they're lazy. So why would you help them? And once that seed is planted, it just grows. And it's an unfortunate truth because I think all of our nature should be to want to help one another, to share, to want there to be a collective. But it's tough, man. It's tough to be black in this country. Period. That's a whole thought. But when you have to consider the fact that we are diverse, because not all black comes from West Africa. Some from the West Indies, some from South America, some from, places all over the world. And you make it to this country and you're just squeezed into black. And I hear black people often very proudly declare that we are not a monolith. And we have to declare that because there are those who want to squeeze us into this box and make us stay there. But in not being a monolith, there is some vulnerability there, right? We often do not come to the table with a collective push. We often don't come to the table asking for a collective outcome or demanding a collective outcome. And in this masterful ability for the oppressors to divide us, and by us, I don't just mean black people, immigrants, women, poor people. Collectively, we will be far greater than those that oppress us, but they've made it less clear to us that we should be united on so many things. And I'm going to take this into our next question because there's some similar language. Mm-hmm. As black men, what are our non-negotiables and what are issues other than criminal justice reform that we should vote on together, locally and nationally? And I brought this into this same question because that together part spoke to that collective. Criminal justice reform is a very, very loud one. Mm-hmm. Because we watch how that impacts us people, on the news. We watch our bodies laid out and our mothers mourning and crying in our funerals. And so that is a big one. And ultimately, Ramses, that's a good place to stop. Not because we don't need more, but again, if we start to list all of our issues, we're going to have one issue that's very important to some people and not others. We realize that the more issues that we put on the table that are important, the more places we have to disagree. And that disagreement has us arguing with each other over what's most important instead of coalescing around an issue and pushing it forward, right? This issue of criminal justice reform is on the table right now. They're already actively trying to bring forward policies that were in the George Floyd Act that didn't get pushed through collectively, but they're taking pieces of it. Okay, let's give us a little bit on this and give us a little bit more on this. And again, these are things that could be researched easily. So we want to speak more to how you guys feel rather than trying to lay out absolute lines of policy, only because we don't have enough time.
Yeah.
Reach out to us as a resource. We will point you in the right direction. We will send you links. We will send you scholarly reports. We will send you accurate, reputable, verified data. CivicCipher.com, Civic Cipher on all social media platforms. Trust me, we respond. So DM us, email us, click any of the links, you will reach us. But collectively, having these conversations with each other starting November 6th, so that the next time we're ready to vote, we've already had these conversations. We're already educated. We already know the things that will impact us as a collective most, from criminal justice reform to social programmings that would actually cut into crime instead of giving us more police officers with bigger guns and better tanks and better shields and better body armor. We know, because the data tells us, that does not affect the crime rate in our communities, not in a way that's positive for us. Right? The police get more money. They can arrest more people.
It doesn't make the crime.
And by arresting more people, you can say that black people committed more crime and then demand and justify a greater budget the following year. But we know better. Right? So again, in this election, we have a candidate who wants to get rid of the Department of Education. Who do you guys think that's going to affect the most?
The people that go to private school or the people that go to public school?
Right. So these things are far less complicated than we want them to be. But again, man, black people have had it hard in this country. Some of us do believe that our voices aren't heard, that our prayers aren't answered, that our votes don't count. And when you're disenfranchised and discouraged and you're hurt and disappointed and killed and arrested over and over again, you do get this radical pushback in you that'll make you look at something that is obviously positive for you and wrap your mind around that not being the case, right? Like this black woman that looks like your aunt or your sister or your mom running for president, and you thinking, no, that's too obvious. That looks too much like right, so it must be wrong, so no, I'm good. I cannot vote for her just because she's black. Well, what about because you're black? And what the policies that she wants to push forward will do for your everyday life and those that look like you and those that you care about specifically.
I want to add another couple of things here too, because again, as black men, what are our non-negotiables and what are the issues other than criminal justice reform that we should vote on together, locally and nationally? That's a list that includes a lot of different things. These are things we talk about on the show quite a bit, and of course the list goes on, but some of the more important ones that I believe is restorative economic justice for black people in this country. Healthcare. We need access to healthcare that prioritizes us the same way it prioritizes our Caucasian brothers and sisters. Especially our women. Other causes include housing discrimination. If that doesn't affect you, it doesn't mean that it does not affect other black people in this country. Housing discrimination is a big deal. And if you need a deep dive, I know John Oliver has done a deep dive on that. For those that have access to the internet elsewhere, you can check out a whole breakdown on YouTube if you want to see how deep that rabbit hole goes. Environmental racism. And I implore you to research that. that is something, again, if you don't live in an environment where environmental racism affects you, it does not mean it doesn't affect poor Black and brown communities around the country. And this list, it goes on and on.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's always going to be a number of causes that we can get behind. But I think Q said it best, you know, once we have an idea of something that affects most of us and we can all get behind that one thing and there's some momentum there, then we are stronger in that moment than when we are fighting about, well, listen, I'm on this path for this certain kind of restorative justice and then everyone else is on this other path. No, you know, Q has this great analogy where he holds his hand out like it's a flat palm. And he says, it's really easy to break my fingers and render my hand useless when my hand is like this. And then when he coalesces his fingers into a fist, he says, it's a lot harder to break my fingers and to render my hand useless when it's closed into a fist. And all of my fingers are kind of, you know, collapsed in on each other. And there's a singular mission. You know, I know that was a little wordy, but I'm trying to describe it for people listening. In any event, hopefully you could see that visually and understand what that meant. But yeah, there's always going to be a number of issues. And even when we resolve the issues that we have, there's still going to be more issues. White people have issues, Hispanic people have issues, you know, and no matter how many of them you solve, in a complex society, there's going to be more issues. And the thing is us getting on the same page in terms of how to be effective as a voting group and as a group who are citizens of this country, who contribute value to this country, who are endowed with consciousness from our common creator, with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable. Thank you. I'll be talking. Anyway, you know, us getting on the same page in terms of strategy is probably the first order of business. All right. Is it true the Democrats haven't fulfilled their promises to make us as a race of, have fulfilled their promises to us as a race of people? However, that would make a Black man vote for the Republican candidate. So these questions we're reading them as they were written. So we got to translate.
It's a great question. I think
it's a fair question.
I think it's important to point out that this would be true across the board for either party to any group of people. Every politician in my lifetime has ran a race to be president, governor, mayor, city council person on a platform of promises. But because of the way government works, you don't get elected to office and then walk into a room and say, hey, all those things I said I was going to do them, and then press go, and they just happen. Right? The branches of government have to agree on certain things. You have to have a majority in a lot of cases to get legislation that you want pushed forward. Some people may oppose you because they ideologically disagree with you. Some people oppose you because the people who funded their campaign have a different interest in that. Right? The reason why it feels like we are the only group who is always forgotten is, again, because we need more than everybody else needs. And in this country, if we're speaking specifically, you know, Black people and white people, Black people need more from our government than white people do. And I know we don't like to be put in a position where we're quote unquote playing victim, but it's just the history of our country. They gave us the opposite of a head start by a lot. So when you talk about restorative economic justice, or what you may have heard people call reparations, is because we didn't just have a hard go at this. You know, we had to start this game
way behind the starting line, and then we got pushed back several times.
And we continue to get pushed back. And not only did the other team not start at the starting line, they had a head start. So the deficit is massive. However, this goes back to the conversation that we kind of started already. We are splintered into things that we want. Those who oppose us, I'll do you one better. I used this, we spoke somewhere publicly recently, and I brought this up, and I'm only trying to say it faster because we got a bunch of questions and I want to get to as many of them as we can before we don't have enough time. white supremacists have a singular thing that they've united on. White Christian nationalists in this country have decided that minorities and women are less than human. They deserve less rights. They deserve less of a voice. They should not even be allowed to participate in this thing. We're the smarter, and by we, I'm speaking as them. We're the smarter, stronger, more powerful class of people. And, you know, we'll make the decisions that are best for everyone. And they should trust us to do that. And the world would be a better place if we were the only ones that made all of the choices and did what was best for us. And rich, white Christian nationalist heterosexual men have convinced homosexual white men, white women, white poor people, that the white part is most important. Don't make being a woman most important.
Don't make rich most important.
Because then you have to look out for all women. Don't make being poor important, because then you got to look out for all poor people. They've even convinced some minorities that the idea of white supremacy is how they should align ideologically too.
And it will ultimately extend to them.
And will trickle down our prosperous lives to you. And so on and so on. I don't want to talk you guys in circles like you're not picking up what I'm putting down. So they've united on that singular focus. And those at the very, very top of that pyramid benefit from it. Everybody else doesn't. But ideologically, they're on the same page. So all those people get to feel like they're getting what they want from government. They're not. But they made that one issue the most pressing and the one that they're most identifiable with, so it works. On our side, that's not the case. First and foremost, because we're not black supremacists. First and foremost, we don't consider ourselves more important. We don't consider ourselves the only ones that deserve God's grace. We don't consider ourselves the only ones that deserve to have a voice. We don't consider ourselves the only ones that deserve love or safety or an education or food or wealth or the pursuit of happiness. So that's our first breakdown, you guys. That's our first weakness, is that we're not evil. We're not, as a ethnicity or as a race or as a collective, greedy. There are people who feel like President Barack Obama wasn't a good president because he wasn't the black Donald Trump, because he didn't get in office and push forward legislation, agendas, and things that only benefited black people. The same people have used those same arguments against Vice President Harris, because she said on a microphone that she will not bring forth policy just for black people. It's not just us here. But the other side, they don't care nothing about morals and ethics and being kind and generous and empathetic. They don't care about any of that.
Yeah.
So they've tricked a lot of you into believing that they're going to get in office and make things better for everybody. But we should know better, right? So part of our weakness is our heart and our desire to share, right? So we get to this point and the Democratic Party has fallen short on a lot of their promises to us. But we have to understand that typically, right, because we watched our former president throw all these rules away. So that part is confusing too, because we're like, wait, didn't you, when Barack was in there, didn't these people have to agree and didn't? And then this other guy got in there and broke laws and broke rules and just did whatever he wanted, and it still seems not being held accountable for it. So I can see how that could be confusing. But politicians and politics, the way government works in this country, no one can actually just walk in the room and do everything they want to do. So that's part of the problem. Some people, I have to acknowledge, don't always get in office and always try all the things they said they wanted to do. But in cases that we've seen in most recent history, there are those who collectively work against us. And even when we get to the highest seat, because of the three branches of government, because of checks and balances, because the need for a majority, because of the filibuster, and I can go on and on and on. It's been hard to push forward the agenda for black people in this country.
Yeah. It's not because people don't want to do it.
It's not because people aren't trying.
Yeah. And it's not because
it's far more nuanced and complicated than we think. And again, we'll continue to have this conversation. CivicCipher.com, Civic Cipher on all socials. Message us. We will call back, write back, text back, email back. We might even pull up on you and sit down and talk to you.
It's not beyond the realm of possibilities. Also, I think you said it best initially. It's hard to hold that magnifying glass up to the Democrats and ignore what Republicans are doing, or not do the same thing insofar as Republicans are concerned.
We do not scrutinize them at the same level. It's a very interesting thing that we do.
Yeah, and it's not to give anyone a free pass or to like unnecessarily condemn anyone else. Rather, it is some food for thought, something to keep in mind for people that are overly critical of Democrats every go round. Because there's people, I'm not voting for Democrats. There's people that did that with Obama. It was doing that to Barack. That was wild. But anyway,
are they? Do they break their promises to us, or have they not fulfilled their promises to us compared to who else?
Yeah, that's the part. Thank you.
Is how that question should be asked. Who's this party who has delivered on all areas for black people? I'll wait.
Yeah. If it's nobody, then you stuck with the two choices, and the one that is at least promising, or at least trying, or, whatever. And we've talked about that at the beginning of this conversation. There's some deliverables that have been hit. It's just on a longer scale.
Yeah.
And we can look at them.
Important to point out as well. And I love that you guys might notice Ramses never identifies as a Democrat, more as a liberal or a progressive, which is how you should think about this as well. Because I've seen people talk about how the Democratic Party used to do us, and how we should have always stayed with the Republicans, and that you'd be ignoring a lot of history just to say that based on the party designation, because the ideology of the parties switched once upon a time.
Yeah, it was right after the Great Depression.
Yeah, I think 1920s.
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Right? So very, very wealthy, rich Southerners became Republicans around that time. And it flipped the entire ideology of that party. And I think a similar thing is happening to that party now, where they've changed identity. They used to be about law and order and the Constitution and things like that. And now they clearly could care less about any of that. So, more research, more questions, and more conversation. This is not a judgmental place. This is not a pointing the fingers. We just want the conversation to continue beyond surface level talking points that are kind of designed to get the answer to a question that you've already determined the answer before you asked us.
Yeah.
And we're about learning from you and you learning from us as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we learn a lot too. Granted, we know probably more than most people because we work in this space every day.
We get paid to read
and
all
research,
of this
and
stuff
it all has to be
all the time
scholarly. Yeah. And so, just bear that in mind. All right. What are ideas and suggestions that we haven't tried to improve education and awareness of what's on the ballot and how to understand it and be a more informed voter? I like that question. Well, we talked about that a bit at the beginning. You can go to both candidates' websites. They're not difficult to find.
Right.
There are a number of nonpartisan organizations that make cheat sheets. Where we live, all of the propositions there, you can find information, what do certain propositions mean, and get a breakdown for your own communities and so forth. Go ahead.
Yeah, the important thing when we say KamalaHarris.com or Project 2025, Project 2025 was written by the authors of Project 2025. It was not written by the Democratic Party to try to make them look bad.
Yeah.
So I think people might think when they see that document that that's something that Democrats put together to shine a negative light on Donald Trump and his people.
No,
Donald Trump's closest advisors, friends, donors,
former cabinet members,
cabinet members put that playbook together for him, so the next time he was president, they could run that play. And I know people question the efficacy of information that they get because there's so much misinformation out there. So I will continue to make us a resource. Reach out to us. We will help you find accurate information. We don't have all of that information available to us right now, so I don't want us to take up too much time on just that singular question.
All right. What are the factors that caused the decline of black male voters? What was the results of that decline, and how do we prevent it from happening? So I want to go first here.
Okay.
First off, there has always been a subset of black male voters who have voted Republican. The data actually shows, when you get a large enough sample size, that this is from the Black Voter Project, actually. So I had a conversation with the director of the Black Voter Project, and he explained this to me. He said that when you have a large enough sample size, you're talking 1,000 plus, and these are just black men, right? Not a 1,000 plus sample size, and it's black men are a percentage of it, and white people are a percentage of it, and gays are a percentage of it, and whatever. Just black men, and you have a large enough sample size, you see that the data, again, the assumption here is that a larger sample size will give you more accurate data. The data reflects the historical.
That's not assumption. That's scientific.
Scientific.
The more
okay,
data you have, the more accurate.
There you go.
Your conclusion will be.
So the scientific assumption, I suppose, is probably what I was trying to say. But yeah, you're right. These people, they specifically poll black people, black men, in this instance, and their determination is that black people in this election are not voting at any higher rate, statistically speaking, a statistically relevant higher rate than they have at any other election in the past, not 2016 and not since the 70s. And so the headlines are exaggerated because there is one section, and I believe the increase was like 0.7% of younger black men are actually considering a Donald Trump, voting for Donald Trump and a Donald Trump presidency. Now, the question is, what are the factors that cause the decline of black male voters? Well, I think I got a theory here. Because the internet. Now, when we're looking at the actual numbers and the actual age range of these people, these are the people who are the folks that have spent years listening to, like, the Andrew Tates of the world. These are the people who kind of fully buy into the goofy, like, relationship guru advice people on the internet. These are the people who, and I'm not trying to knock them because they're humans and they're susceptible to a computer whose job it is to master human behavior, black, white, or otherwise. And they can be duped the same way any other human can be duped, or they can be convinced. That's probably the better word to use. They can be convinced the way that anyone else can be convinced. And so I think that at least part of that 0.7% that has made the national headlines and caused us all to indeed look at these numbers like they are somehow way more statistically relevant than they have been historically. I would blame that phenomenon, at least in part, on some of the rhetoric, some of the information silos, some of the algorithm outcomes that people end up encountering on social media platforms.
I wanted to stop my brother from even theorizing because the data does not support that those headlines are even true. Mm-hmm. The headlines, however, I think come from what Ramses just said.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Right? The headlines come from that. It's not an actual thing, but people think so because of that, because the way that people get information and because people are more out loud about it now. It's cool to be contrarian now.
Yeah,
it's cool to say the earth is flat. It's provocative. It starts a conversation.
Some people, they need that online attention.
Yeah, it does not matter whether that's how they even really feel. But they know they'll get the attention and the engagement. They can go back and forth. They can be a little bit of a star. You know, so it's not cool to say water's wet and the sky is blue. It's not cool to say things that people consider obvious. But if you can say something provocative, it gets the people going.
All right. Let's go with this one. How does leaving a majority black community for a majority white community impact shaping policy for places that are predominantly black? Well,
may
I think you're going to have to.
Not as much as you might think.
Okay, go ahead.
If a specific group of people leaves an area en masse, then of course how that group shows up at the polls
Is affected.
and the voice that they have is directly affected.
Okay.
The reason why I said may I is because we didn't talk about a sector of a community. You know, we're talking about a predominantly black, let's just say city, instead of a part of town.
Okay.
Having people financially glow up and relocate to a part of town that's more white.
Like the Jeffersons.
George and Wheezy. What will happen is that people in that city, it's not a numbers thing, it's a ratio thing.
Okay.
So if the percentage of people in that city that are black is the same, so say it's a 70% black city, a bunch of people make more money and they move into a suburb where they're now the gross minority.
Yeah, I've seen those
The
places.
percentage of black people in the city that they left could remain the same.
Okay.
And their voices will still collectively be heard the same way. The only way that dynamic would shift is if only black people are relocating and then being replaced by people who aren't black.
Gentrification.
Correct.
That sort of thing. Yeah.
And the question didn't give us enough data to know if that's what's happening. So it's hard to answer the question completely. The shaping of outcomes or policy in a city like Detroit, for instance. Detroit was one of the top 6 cities when I was in high school, population for black people by number. By the time the recession hit in 2008, millions of people had left the city, which was the world's largest auto manufacturer at the time. But during that recession, a lot of jobs went away. So did a lot of people. However, it still remained a largely black city. So even though it went from several million people to several 100,000, the political outcomes were the same because it was still a mostly black populated city, even though the numbers were smaller by the millions. So I hope that answers that question. Again, with more information and more data, we can answer that question more fully. But I kind of stepped in front of Ramses because that's a complicated question that could go a lot of different directions.
Yeah.
And just because there's not enough factors in the question, we could just speak to 20 different possible scenarios. And again, we got to try to get to every question that was asked.
And then for me, and we're almost done here, but then for me, I came from California and I came to Arizona. So there's always been, my communities have always been very, very mixed. You know what I mean? Even in a place like Compton, California, there's still a significant population of Hispanic people. And that was a time in my life when I was very young. So I wasn't like clicked on to like community needs and that sort of stuff. So, I haven't lived in like a majority black community. That hasn't been my lived experience. But more recently, I have been able to see the impact of that. And because you've come from that, I know that, you had more to offer that question than I did. So that's why I was hoping that, that we would answer it that way. So, I think that this might be our last question here. Has there been talk on how to reach people without internet or social networks that most of us still need to reach? So, you know what? We have some privileged information just because we're connected with some people and some movements and things like that. And we happen to know that knocking on doors, starting conversations, having community forums, reserving rooms and passing out flyers for people to attend, making phone calls, all that stuff is still effective and people still use it.
And contrary to popular belief, Ramses and I still talk on the radio.
Yeah.
I know digital platforms have kind of taken over, but people still get in their cars
every week
and turn their radios on.
Yeah, across the whole country. A lot of radio stations, you know what I mean? And so, you know, a lot of, you know, legacy methods of communication and reaching people are still very viable. And, you know, if you feel so inclined, a lot of these things are very accessible. They don't require, some instances, they don't require a lot of money. In other instances, they don't require any money. So for folks that want to, you know, galvanize people, engage people after, not just before, but after elections take place, you know, it's on you. And to be honest with you, that's part of how you get started in politics. You know, that's part of how you like get started in really creating some change, you know. And so, you know, if that feels like something that you still want to do it. You know, if you need some support, we have an Ebony Excellence segment on our radio show, and we love shouting out people that are doing good work out there. And, you know, we'll still be your brothers.
Something I want to say before we get out of here.
Yeah.
There's a manipulation that has happened to human beings as a collective. In the United States, probably more so than the rest of the world. And it's the construct of race. We argue black versus white issues. We argue gay versus heterosexual issues. We argue Christian versus Gentile or unsaved or sinner issues. And by causing all these different silos and different sectors of people, those who oppress us have masterfully gone unscathed, right? It is a massive cross section of things at the top. Ramses communicated it to me for the first time, and I was like, wow, right? The white, heterosexual, Christian male who's wealthy, that's a lot of things that had to cross over. But that person then took every other group of people and made them a silo. Hispanics go over there. Black people go over there. You know, Asian people go over there. Because if we united, that person's position would be threatened. So you have black straight people versus black gay people, when they have so many similar interests and goals and things that they want out of life. But if you can keep them divided on that thing, right, and use church to do it, right, make that other group an other and make them bad, and then they won't unite, right? And then there are far more poor people in this country than rich, far more.
It's not even kind of close.
It's not even kind of close. It might be like 95-5, like something gross. If they all united, right? So you have to keep them divided. There's a candidate in this race that has policies that will affect most people positively. There's another candidate that has policies that will affect most people negatively. Somehow this race is like a neck and neck 50-50 thing, and the data shows that shouldn't make sense. The reason why it does is because they found a masterful way to tribalize people and put them all on these different teams, even though they have these cross sections of things they could all equally benefit from. So when you get in a room and you say, well, who's going to do the most for the black issues? Well, if everybody in this room is black but also poor, there's way more poor people than black people. So if everybody poor was represented by someone, that person could do the most good for the most of us.
That was the shift Dr. King took before he was assassinated. That's why he was in Memphis when he got assassinated. Go ahead.
No, please expound.
Well, listen, I think you hit the nail on the head. I wanted to just impart this last little bit of wisdom for people that don't have this context. You know, this is something that I am fortunate enough to know, but I wasn't born knowing this. So, you know, please accept this. Complex societies have been around for a very, very, very long time. Extremely long time. And governments have been tried and have been toppled. Societal experiments have been performed and succeeded and failed. And this has happened long before the United States of America was even a thought. Okay? The reason I say this is because people learning how to wield power, people learning how to divide and conquer, people learning how to benefit themselves and their posterity at the expense of the masses. These books have been written long before this country existed. And in the years since, people have only been able to refine and modernize the strategies. Again, we're talking about societies. And so when you look at a person like a Donald Trump, and you look at a person like a Kamala Harris, and you look at a system of democracy and a two-party system in a country as young as this one is, and you think you got it all figured out, and you think that you're smarter than the great human algorithm that has tried and failed and tried and failed and ultimately become the most optimized version of itself, for those that are familiar with indeed how algorithms work. For you to think that somehow you are flying above that.
Yeah, you're singular.
Right. Most, like Q and I both realize that we are just as susceptible to disinformation, misinformation. We know that.
Yeah, we've had to own it with these microphones on.
My God. We had to come into this room and say we got that wrong. And the reason I'm telling you this is because I don't want you to feel like whatever path you've committed to, I don't want you to feel like you need to stay on that path. Because what we see a lot is that people will make a decision. Q, you say this better than I do, so forgive me if I get it wrong and correct me if I get it wrong. But people will make a decision based off of limited information, but they don't know it's limited information at that time. It's all the information they have. They'll make a decision. Let's call it a Trump decision for the sake of argument, for a hypothetical, right? Then someone else will bring new information that casts not only their candidate, but their decision in a different light. And rather than changing the decision with the new information, they will re-engineer a justification for the decision that they've made that somehow flies in the face of the new information, factual information that they've made. And this is something that happens to human beings.
Yeah.
This is something that happens in societies. And this is something that is as old as the great human experiment that nature is performing.
The emotional connection to that decision makes the new information antithetical to them, not the information they
exactly
had. So now it's a personal, it's not they're defending themselves. They think they're still defending Donald Trump or their decision to vote for him. That passion with which they're defending that decision is because your information that you brought is now an affront to that person.
Go ahead and hit them with the Mark Twain quote.
And they're defending themselves. I believe it was Mark Twain who said it is easier to fool a person than to convince them that they have been fooled. It is not about the information that they were provided. It is about the position that they said out loud was their position. So now you are an affront or an opposition to that person, not just their idea, because the new information should disprove the idea and cause them to move on without resistance. But no, now you coming at me.
Yeah.
And sadly, in a lot of these cases, there is something in Donald Trump that people identify within themselves, and they are now defending themselves, not just the misinformed decision that they made.
Listen, man, I don't want you to feel bad. I don't want you to feel it is human nature. Some people are more susceptible to it. Some people aren't. Some people had the right set of circumstances that got them there. Some people haven't walked that same path. But it is okay to be wrong. It is okay to provide a critical examination of your own process. Indeed, we have to do that too. And it is okay to recognize.
We got on microphones and said very critical things about Kamala Harris with very limited wrong information.
Yeah, and we had to come back and be like, hey, that was
so we're not going to pretend that we've always had the answers or that we even have all the answers now, but we're trying.
Yeah.
And we're open to being educated, being taught, and actually being corrected.
Yep, exactly. So for those that still have more questions, Q has laid down the the framework for you to reach out. We can still keep having these conversations, and we may end up doing some more of those in the future. That's looking likely.
Oh no, absolutely.
And then we're going to hopefully be able to expand it and let more people into the conversation. But that first one needed to be us.
Yeah, that needed to be just us.
And you know, if you wanted to keep the conversation going, you have everything you need for the show. Of course, we're going to put this on the Black Information Network too, because this is something that Chris Thompson wanted us to have, and it just kind of worked out this way.
Absolutely.
So you can reach out to me at Ramses Ja.
I am Q Ward on all social media as well. CIVIC on everything. .com, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever you call it.
Facebook, YouTube,
and don't forget the red microphone talkback feature.
Oh yeah,
on the iHeartRadio app.
Yeah,
so we can continue this conversation as well. And meet us on Fanbase, because we are going to do some unique content that will only be available on Fanbase.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm gonna say this, man. First, Q, I love you.
I love you too, brother.
I'm proud of you. Everybody that listened to this point in the show, I'm gonna say it to you. I love you. And I'm proud of you. Even if we end up on the other side of it, you listened, and that's more than we can say for a lot of folks. And like you said, we're willing to listen too, because you've listened to us. So let's keep it going, y'all. And until next time,
peace.